My name is Hannah. I'm 18 years old, and I never in my wildest dreams thought I would share something so personal. But after what I went through, I just can't keep quiet. I was an everyday teenager caught up in homework, hanging out with friends, scrolling through my phone. Faith wasn't really on my radar. I wasn't against it, I just didn't think about it much. But on the day I died, everything changed. Everything I saw, everything I heard, it was more real than anything in this life. And yes, it was terrifying. I was gone for just a few minutes, but during that time, Jesus showed me things that rattled me to the core. This is my story. It started like any other day. I woke up to my mom's voice calling me to breakfast, groaned as usual, then flopped an arm over my face, trying to grab a few more minutes of sleep. Eventually, I checked my phone to see if my friends had texted or if there was any interesting gossip online. Then I dragged myself out of bed and got ready. I remember it was a chilly morning, but I hardly noticed. My mind was already thinking about the day ahead, my group of friends, weekend plans, maybe a party or two. God wasn't anywhere on my to-do list. Sure, I went to church sometimes because my mom insisted, but I never took it seriously. For me, it was just an hour of boredom where I'd stare at the clock, daydreaming. I had no idea that, in a few hours, my life would change in ways most people never experience. At lunchtime, the cafeteria was the same chaotic mess it always was. People shouting to be heard, random food items sometimes flying through the air, laughter erupting from every table. I sat with my best friend, who cracked some silly joke. We laughed so hard our sides hurt. That's one of the last normal moments I remember. Right after lunch, everything shifted in the blink of an eye. I was standing by my locker when another friend waved me over. She wanted me to walk outside with her, so we could get some fresh air before the next class. I closed my locker and hurried to catch up. We were halfway across the parking lot when I heard squealing tires. I turned my head just in time to see a truck hurtling right at me. My friend screamed. I didn't even have time to think or move. Then impact. It felt like an explosion all around me, like the air itself detonated. My body went weightless, and pain tore through me like I'd never felt. The world spun into a swirl of sounds, metal crashing, rubber burning against asphalt, people screaming. Then everything went silent. For a split second, I actually thought time had stopped. The sky seemed frozen. Everyone stood still, but something felt horribly off. I realized I wasn't cold anymore. I wasn't on the ground. I was floating. I looked down and saw my own body sprawled on the pavement. My limbs were twisted at awful angles, blood pooling under my head. My friend knelt beside me, shouting my name and shaking me, but I wasn't there. I was above them, watching like it was a movie scene. Then I felt it, a force pulling me. It was strong and gave me no choice. I was being dragged away from the parking lot, from the world I knew. That was the moment I realized I was dead. People don't get how quickly life can flip. 1 second, I was joking with my friend. The next second, it was all over. I didn't get a goodbye or a heads up. I remember the truck, the feeling of flying through the air, then slamming into concrete. The chaos of screaming voices and screeching tires lasted an instant. Then came this eerie hush. My senses no longer recognized pain or even a heartbeat. It felt like I was in a vacuum. I expected to see the asphalt when I opened my eyes, but instead, I saw my body on the ground with people crowding around it. The strangest thing was trying to reach for my friend. My hand slipped right through her arm like we were on different dimensions. Then came the pull. Something grabbed hold of me, dragging me away. I fought as best I could, but it was useless. It felt like a magnet was yanking me into darkness. I'd always heard that when you die, you walk into a bright light and go to heaven. I didn't see any bright light at first. What I found was darkness. Heavy, suffocating darkness. The further I was pulled, the colder I got, like I was sinking into ice-cold tar. I heard murmuring, sinister whispers, but there were no visible figures. I couldn't make out the words, only the hatred behind them. Then I heard a different voice, one that resonated with absolute authority. Stop. Everything halted. The dragging sensation vanished, the whispers went silent, and suddenly there was light, alive and blazing. It shattered the darkness like lightning. In the center stood a figure. Even before he said a word, I knew who he was. Jesus. And he was not pleased. In that moment, nothing else mattered. My body, my world, my worries, all of it faded away because I was in the presence of the real Jesus. His power filled every space, every molecule. It pierced through me, revealing all my secrets, every corner of my heart. I couldn't move or speak. He looked at me, and I felt it all, love, sorrow, and disappointment mingled into one. I wanted to fall on my face and plead for mercy, but I had no control. I was totally exposed. Finally, he spoke. Hannah, do you know why you are here? I tried to answer, but no sound came out. Jesus didn't wait. He lifted his hand, and instantly I saw my entire life replayed. Every memory, every hidden sin, every selfish decision, it all appeared like a movie around me, except I didn't just see it. I felt it. I relived each emotion, the consequences of my choices, the ripple effect of the pain I caused. Jesus wasn't being cruel. He was showing me the raw truth. Then the visions changed. Suddenly, I saw the earth consumed by flames. People screamed as darkness spread like a living entity across the world. Worst of all, some walked right into it willingly, like they didn't even notice it was devouring them. My heart pounded. Then Jesus said something that echoed through every fiber of my being. This is what is coming. Right after he spoke, the light disappeared, and I was plunged into a deep darkness, thicker than anything I can describe. It was as though the darkness itself was alive and trying to choke me. The coldness penetrated more than skin. It felt like it was suffocating my soul. And I sensed I wasn't alone. At first, I could only sense shapes moving beyond my vision, shadowy forms slithering in the pitch black. Then came the voices, groaning and raspy laughter. A distorted voice hissed, "You don't belong here yet." I twisted around, but there was no direction, no up or down. That's when I started to fall, like the ground vanished beneath me. I plummeted further, and the further I fell, the more horrifying it got. Whispering turned to shrieks. Shadows took on ugly shapes, reaching out, trying to pull me into some fathomless pit. There was an overpowering smell of decay and burning flesh. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Then a crushing realization hit me. I was in hell. I saw endless flames and heard layer upon layer of wailing. Faces materialized, twisted in agony or furious rage. Some looked familiar, people from my school, acquaintances I barely knew. Their eyes locked onto mine, begging for help. And then I heard a voice I recognized. "Hannah, help me." It was a friend of mine, someone I used to joke around with who never took faith seriously. He reached out. I reached back without thinking, tears streaming down my face. But before our hands touched, something latched onto my wrist. Suddenly, I was yanked away and found myself back in the light with Jesus. I gasped and trembled, my chest heaving like I'd run a marathon. I managed to stammer. Why? Jesus's eyes were filled with pain. Because they chose this. My brain reeled.
Who would choose such torment?
But as soon as that thought formed, I understood what he meant. People decide to reject him, to live like he doesn't matter. And by the time they realize the mistake, it's too late. That horrifying image of my friend in torment clung to me. Jesus then spoke words that made my blood run cold. This is only the beginning. Even though Jesus had rescued me from that pit, I felt an undercurrent of danger. Darkness still lurked, and something was watching us. Actually, it felt like many somethings. I sensed them in the corners of my mind. Dozens, maybe hundreds. I glanced around, and that's when I saw them. Dark shapes, almost humanoid but distorted, hovered at the edges of the light Jesus provided. Their eyes were hollow except for a red glow smoldering deep within. They looked ancient and malevolent. Demons. They surrounded us in a massive ring, snarling and shrieking, but refusing to step into the radiance around Jesus. It was as if the light formed a protective barrier. I could hear their voices hissing in my thoughts. Some laughed, others whispered awful things, mocking me. "You think you're free? You're ours, Hannah. We claimed you long ago." It was invasive, like they were burrowing into my mind, planting fear and despair. I looked to Jesus, panicked, pleading for an explanation. He said, "Do not listen to them. Every time you chose sin, you gave them a foothold. Every time you turned away from me, they gained more ground." I wanted to deny it, but I knew he was right. I had lived as though God was an afterthought, not the center of anything. Jesus lifted his hand, and the demons shrieked, recoiling like they were burned. Some vanished into black mist, others lingered, glaring with hatred. "You must understand," Jesus said. "The battle is not just for your body. It is for your soul." In that moment, the darkness faded and the scene shifted. Suddenly, I was standing before something immense. Two colossal gates, shimmering with pure, holy light. They stretched so high, I couldn't see the tops. Instantly, I felt a pull in my spirit, like these gates were the home my soul had always longed for. Then I noticed a shadow extending from the opposite side, an abyss of blackness that seemed endless. From within it came haunting wails. The contrast was jarring. On one side, light and warmth. On the other, cold anguish. Jesus moved toward the gates, and I followed, breathless. As we got closer, I could see people gathered. Some radiated a soft glow and entered the gates with peace. Others were dragged away by an invisible force into that shadowy void. They screamed, clawing at the ground, begging for another chance, but the gates stayed closed to them. I trembled, asking, "Why?" Jesus looked heartbroken as he explained, "They never truly knew me." Some of them called out his name, even prayed, but something about their cries was hollow. It was as if they had acknowledged Jesus with their lips, but never opened their hearts to him. And the gates did not open for them. I couldn't believe it. "But they're praying to you. They're begging." Jesus nodded sadly. "Many use my name, but their hearts are far from me." Those who belonged to him walked through, while the others were taken away, lost forever. I felt absolutely helpless, just standing there, watching. Then Jesus fixed his gaze on me, and I felt his eyes peering right into my soul. I'd always known about Jesus. I heard stories in church, sang songs around Christmas and Easter. But this was not just a story or a sermon. He stood before me, living and real, more authentic than anything in the physical world. His eyes seemed to slice through every facade I'd put up, all my excuses, my attempts to look good to everyone else. He saw my darkest parts, every sin I was too ashamed to admit. But I also felt his love, genuine, overwhelming love that didn't waver, even though he knew all about my failures. I dropped to my knees, tears pouring down my face. I couldn't speak. Jesus stepped closer and asked, "Hannah, do you know why I brought you here?" My voice quivered. I'm not sure. Images flashed before me. Moments when I sensed a nudge from God and ignored it. Times I chose selfishness over kindness. Times I lied to get my way. Times I pretended to be a Christian but lived like God didn't matter. Jesus said, "I brought you here because I love you and I don't want you to be lost." I broke down, sobbing. But I've failed. I've messed up so many times. He smiled gently. "You were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to follow." A sudden shift happened. The luminous sky darkened, and the ground rumbled beneath us. It felt like the entire world was quaking. Then I saw a future event play out. The earth splitting open, flames erupting, people in absolute chaos. Storms, disasters, war, you name it. I heard terrified screams. It was devastation on a global scale, a chain reaction of destruction. And in the midst of it, demonic figures moved, whispering lies, luring people deeper into darkness. I turned to Jesus, shaking. "What is this?" "This is what will happen if they don't turn back," he said. My heart throbbed with fear. But they don't know. Most of them have no idea. Jesus nodded, sadness weighing on his expression. That is why I'm sending you back. A lump formed in my throat. I didn't want to leave him, especially not after seeing what was coming. But then he spoke words that made my heart pound. Tell them, warn them, because soon the door will close. Right after he said that, the vision shifted again. The raging fires faded, replaced by ordinary scenes, people living life like nothing was wrong. They went to work, scrolled through social media, laughed with friends. But then I saw them through Jesus' eyes. Sin wasn't just happening around them, it was embedded in their hearts. I watched people gossip, and their hateful words turned into black smoke, suffocating others. I saw greed clinging to people like thick tar. Lies slithered from their mouths like snakes, binding those they deceived. Lust wrapped heavy chains around unsuspecting souls. And nobody seemed to care. They went on with their normal routines as if nothing was out of place. Then Jesus raised his hand, and I noticed something that made my stomach twist. People were marked. Some radiated light from their foreheads, beautiful and pure. Others carried a dark stain that only I could see, an ominous mark, invisible to normal sight. I wanted to shout warnings, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. Even if they heard me, they'd probably dismiss it or laugh. The most heartbreaking part was seeing people who attended church every Sunday. They sang the songs, prayed the prayers, but their hearts were somewhere else. They only went through the motions, and they were marked by darkness. Jesus, I whispered. What about them?
His voice held sorrow.
Unless they turn to me with their whole hearts, they will not enter my kingdom. It took my breath away. I'd assumed that believing in God automatically meant salvation. But it's more than that. It's about truly knowing Jesus, surrendering to him, not just name-dropping him on Sundays. Suddenly, the vision vanished. Next, I saw a large, glowing book appear. I knew instantly it was the Book of Life. Its pages shimmered with a holy fire. Jesus opened it, and page after page was filled with names shining like stars, people who genuinely gave their hearts to him. I recognized a few relatives, some people from our church. But then I saw blank spaces, spots where names should have been. People who thought they were saved but had never fully given themselves to Jesus. They did good deeds, believed God existed, maybe even prayed occasionally. But they never actually surrendered. My hands shook. Why? I asked. Jesus answered. They never gave me their hearts. They spoke my name but never followed me. He turned a few more pages, and what I saw next made my stomach drop. Some names were fading. These belonged to people who once walked closely with God, but chose the world instead. They turned away from the truth, and their names were dissolving like dust. I choked on my next words. Can they be saved? Jesus looked at me with deep sorrow. As long as they have breath, they still have a chance. But soon, time will run out. I felt panic. How many people think they're fine but have no idea they're on the verge of losing everything? Then the scene changed again. An angel appeared before us, radiating a brightness so intense it felt like standing next to the sun. His presence exuded authority. He spoke in a voice that shook the very air. The time is near. Judgment is coming. Many will be lost. I wanted to beg for more time, for a way to stop all this. But the angel continued. They mock the warnings. They laugh at the truth. They choose darkness over light. And when the door closes, they will plead for mercy, but it will be too late. My knees felt weak, and I dropped to the ground. Is there anything we can do? I whispered. The angel looked at Jesus, who nodded. Tell them, the angel said, to turn back before the door closes forever. I was overwhelmed by a profound sadness. I knew most people wouldn't listen. They'd say there's still time, that God wouldn't actually send anyone to hell. They'd go on living like always until, in a single, dreadful moment, they realized it was too late. Jesus turned to me, his voice gentle yet powerful. Tell them, Hannah, tell them what you have seen. I opened my mouth to ask more questions, but the light around me dimmed, and a force pulled me backward. Wait, I cried. I don't want to leave. But in the blink of an eye, I felt my lungs burn and my chest ache. I was back in my body. Someone shouted, "She's back. We have a pulse." My eyes fluttered open to blinding hospital lights and frantic medical staff. My vision swam. I tried sitting up, but a nurse pressed me down. "Hannah, stay still. You were gone for almost 3 minutes." 3 minutes. That was all the time it took to see the span of eternity. I glanced around, searching for someone, anyone, to believe me. But I knew they'd assume I was hallucinating. Yet, I couldn't deny what I had just been shown. I'd been given a second chance, not for my own sake, but to warn others. As soon as I could speak, I started sharing my story. It felt impossible not to. Jesus is real, heaven is real, hell is real, and time is ticking away faster than we realize. Those first days after I was revived were brutal. Every time I closed my eyes, memories of what I'd seen came flooding back. Faces in torment, the book of life, the sorrow in Jesus' eyes. It weighed on me constantly. My parents chalked it up to trauma. My friends shrugged it off, saying I'd had some out-of-body experience. The more I tried to tell them the seriousness of it, the more they looked at me like I was broken. That's when I recognized the real battle was here on earth. People aren't always rejecting God because they hate him. A lot just don't care. They're too wrapped up in daily life to notice the clock is winding down. That horrified me even more because it reminded me exactly of the people I'd seen in hell, those who thought they had endless tomorrows. I knew I couldn't go back to my old routine, obsessing over social media or worrying about popularity. I'd been shown something that demanded action. Over and over, I heard Jesus' words. Tell them. So I did. First to my family. My mom wept. My dad listened in silence. My younger sister didn't know what to say. Then to my friends. Some believed, most didn't. I wrote about it, talked about it in youth group, posted online. I figured if people wanted to call me crazy, so be it. This wasn't just a dream or a near-death hallucination. It was a warning. A serious, real warning that I couldn't keep to myself. I told them about the people who assumed they were saved but weren't, about the book of life, and how some names were missing or fading. I talked about the demons, how they thrive on our sinful choices. And I told them about Jesus, his immeasurable love, how he saw everything I'd ever done and still wanted me. I shared how he showed me it's never too late to turn back, but that soon it will be. Some listened, some rolled their eyes. But my responsibility wasn't to force them to believe. It was simply to share what I'd experienced. If you're reading this, please pay attention. This isn't just my story, it's also your wake-up call. I died. I saw what's beyond this life. Not everybody gets that second chance. Hell is real. It's not just for monstrous criminals, but for anyone who pushes God aside and chooses to live on their own terms. People imagine they have forever to change. They tell themselves they'll get right with God when they're older or less busy. But time is short. Jesus showed me glimpses of what's coming, events that will shake the world to its core. He said people need to awaken before it's too late. I don't mind if people label me as gullible or dramatic. I did my part. I told the truth. The rest is up to each person. Jesus waits with open arms, but the door won't stay open forever. Once it closes, there's no going back. So please don't brush this off. Don't assume you can get around to faith someday. Because someday can sneak up on you, just like that truck did on me. Coming back also taught me that the spiritual battle I witnessed isn't just in some other dimension, it's happening here, right now. At first, I tried to blend back into my old life. Then the nightmares started. I'd see dark shadows in my room at night. I'd hear snickers and threats in my dreams. They reminded me of the pit. They wanted me to doubt myself, to give up sharing. And the more I spoke about Jesus, the more intense these demonic attacks got. There were nights I woke up paralyzed, unable to speak or move, a dark silhouette looming at the corner of my bed. That's when I realized I had a weapon, the name of Jesus. I had seen how demons fled from his presence. So instead of cowering, I prayed. I commanded them to leave in Jesus' name, and they did. They had no choice. It dawned on me then, we're not fighting just flesh and blood. Every single day, Souls hang in the balance. The enemy's greatest lie is telling people they have all the time in the world. But I have seen the truth. I've seen what happens when you ignore the signs. And I refuse to stay quiet out of fear. Jesus didn't show me these things so I could lock them away. He showed me because the hour is close, and he wants people to wake up. If you look around, you can sense something isn't right. Society is more divided. Sin is celebrated. People call evil good and good evil. Everyone just does whatever feels right to them. That's exactly what Jesus warned me about. Some think they'll wait to get serious about God later in life, or that showing up at church occasionally is enough. But I saw the book of life. I saw how many assumed they were on the right path but were actually missing from the pages. When their moment came, they were dragged away. I don't want that for anyone. Jesus doesn't want that for anyone. But he won't force your hand. It's up to you to choose him. The most dangerous deception? Believing you have more time. One day, you might wake up and it's over. The door is shut. The only thing left then would be regret. So please don't postpone this. Don't say you'll deal with it later. Later might never come. Jesus is calling you, yes, you, at this very moment. Will you answer? Will you walk away? I've said what I was meant to say, what I was sent back to tell. The rest is in your hands.